Data stories are a genre of long-form data journalism that combine text, infographics, statistical charts, and various other types of visual artifacts. They are characterized by a strong interdependence of textual and visual elements. Prior visualization research has focused on investigating the rhetorical aspect of data visualization and understanding the role of visualization and interactivity in establishing subgenres of data stories. However, there has been little research on the interplay between data visualizations and the other elements present in the data story, especially in regards to their communicative role. Within data stories, data visualizations appear to act as an argument promoting a particular understanding on a given issue, where the selective representation of a topic can shape audience perceptions or interpretations. In this regard, little consideration has been given to the methodological frameworks for the systematic assessment of data visualization's argumentative role and interdependence with other textual and visual elements. These gaps motivate our research question. What is the communicative function of data visualizations in data stories, and how do they relate to the other story elements? We define data stories as hybrid multimodal artifacts that weave number, words, images, and design into a coherent whole. Those artifacts must have a coherent and cohesive relationship between the different modes, both textual and visual. This inherent hybridity of data stories, with different semiotic modes interacting and cooperating, calls for an entangled analytical method that meticulously considers all its elements. For this reason, we start by breaking data stories according to their different elements, seeking to understand the interplay between them. The relation between the different elements of a story shapes the impression and understanding of the respective topic. Especially when applying data visualizations to represent social, cultural, or ecological issues, it is hard to maintain data visualization are unbiased, objective, or neutral. On the contrary, they function as political artifacts that can challenge or naturalize particular worldviews. Research on journalism has extensively studied how textual devices can generate specific orientations towards a topic. This is known as framing and is an expanding research area in data visualization. Framing can be defined as the process through which people develop a particular conceptualization of a topic or reorient their thinking about it. A narrower definition of framing in communication is that it seeks to select some aspects of reality and make them more prominent in communication, which determines how people understand, remember, and evaluate how they act on a problem. We seek to extend the concept of framing to visualization in data story and understand framing as a process in which particular aspects of a phenomenon are deliberately or not presented in salient ways and thus promote particular evaluations, interpretations, and decisions. The first approach we take as a base in our analysis is the one proposed by Entman, who identified the main elements of framing contained in a text. The first element is the problem definition and identifies the issues that is at stake. Causal interpretation describes the forces that generate the issue. Moral evaluation identifies all elements that judge motivation and faults. Finally, the elements suggesting and justifying solution are called treatment recommendation. One data story may include all four or a subset of these framing elements. The second perspective we mobilize in our framework is Rodriguez and Dimitrova levels of visual framing. This approach suggests a four-tiered model for categorizing visuals function as denotative systems, stylistic semiotic systems, connotative systems, and ideological representations. For our research, we integrate both approaches. The elements of framing help identifying the communicative function of visualizations in regard to a given issue. Following levels of visual framing turn our attention to the particular characteristics of visual forms. For this study, we draw on the archive of two major data journalism competitions, Sigma Awards and Society for News Design awards. We searched for all the articles awarded in 2021 and 2022 to select stories with relevant keywords. We reviewed each of these articles, ensuring that they would exhibit the fundamental characteristics of data stories, have water as a topical focus, and be written in English. Based on these criteria, we obtained a corpus of 17 stories published by news outlets worldwide. This carefully selected sample allowed us to perform qualitative in-depth analysis of each story and consider each visual and textual elements as unique units. In total, we extracted 117 data visualizations for our analysis. 6 coders worked in tandems, analyzing subset of stories. Through an iterative process, we developed a qualitative methodology used to analyze the story in our sample. The methodology follows 6 steps. In the initial phases, coders work individually on data stories. In the first step, they set out to understand how each story is structured and how individual blocks of content relate to each other. Coders independently identified and labeled several types of blocks, among others, text, photographs, video, charts, and maps. In the second and third steps, a summary of the outline of the data story and assessment of framing elements for individual blocks is performed. This allowed coders to reach consensus and prepare for the next step. After these 3 initial preparation steps, coders started working in groups to identify patterns and subset of data stories. In step 4, all coders grouped visual representation by type, photographs, maps, graphs, and so on, and analyzed the levels of visual framing for each group. In step 5, coders have worked with patterns and relationships among content blocks and stories. As a result, they formulated these 6 questions spanning through some key themes and patterns that could be recognized across the stories. Finally, in step 6, coders collected answers to the question formulated in the previous step and converted them in individual dimension to fit them in a single matrix of categories. For example, answers to the question, how is the larger concept of water represented, were summarized and translated into 2 dimensions, presence of water and the role of water. Individual dimensions accounted for possible variations. For instance, presence of water could be complemented by 2 variables, minimal or prominent. All the 19 dimensions have been integrated into this visual matrix. This framework has been tested with our sample of data stories. Following the 6 previous questions, we extracted 6 dimensions. The first dimension considers the presence of framing elements in stories and determines their dependency on components of the article. We observed that framing elements are present across all content blocks. However, problem definition and causal attribution are prominent, especially for text and data visualizations. The second dimension encodes the content of framing elements, as visible in this table. Floodings, drought, and climate change are considered as key problems across most of the stories of our sample. Humans are often considered to be responsible for these extreme events. The third dimension is the scale of the storyline and maps the scale of the narrative intended as the political, cultural, geographical, and social extent at which the story is told. We identified 5 levels of scales: local, regional, national, international, or planetary. It is not uncommon for stories to have more than one scale. Local and regional stories are the most common across our sample. The fourth dimension evaluates the presence and roles of actors in the story. We considered 2 subcategories, water and people. Water is portrayed in various ways: as a threat, resource, witness of climate change, or devastating power. For example, water can be seen as a future threat to humans, city, and the environment. In other cases, it holds a witness role. In this scenario, authors frame it as a clear proxy for global warming. While people are consistently included in almost all stories, we recognize them as affected. The impacts and effect of water as on them is the main topic. People are also present as scientists, and to a lesser extent, we encounter them in a political role. The tone of the narrative is concerned with the emotional affordances of the story. We were able to distill 3 different types of variables that point to negative, neutral, and positive tone of stories. Across our sample, text, visual, and data visualization share negative and neutral tones. Only few stories have positive or hopeful content. Finally, the last dimension is concerned with the interdependence of stories' components. Its variables evaluate the connection between text, visuals, and data visualization. Starting from these 6 dimensions, we recognize several recurring patterns in our sample of stories. I will go on and present a selection of our most important findings. First, when looking at their structure, we notice that all stories had a variety of media integrated into them. Visual, text, and data visualizations are well connected with each other and often overlap or are mixed together, and interactivity often reinforces the interweaving between different elements. In some cases, for instance, boxes of text are used as overlays for maps, as the user scrolls or clicks through the story. In this case, visualization is used to establish a visual base upon which the story unfolds. The use of color, typography, and layout was important for maintaining consistency across different visual elements. We also observe that data visualization is mostly used to frame the problem and its causal agents. In this case, data visualization is often presented as in a neutral way, using plain colors, fonts, and visuals. This causes visualization to appear less biased or emotionally charged compared to other types of visual media with a negative tone. As previously mentioned, data visualization is often used to frame problems across our corpus. These are essentially negative and alarming issues, like flooding or drought. Therefore, we observe a discrepancy between the neutral tone conveyed by visualizations and the negative content that is actually represented. Across our sample, people have a way less prominent presence compared to water. They are represented mainly through photographs and connoted as victims of water-related threats. Scientific experts are less present in stories, and they usually only support the problem definition. Moreover, political actors are largely absent. This tendency suggests that authors offer little room for solutions or in discussing the role of policymaking and activism in regards to climate change issues. By portraying people as victims, they dismiss their role as causal agents of climate change. In this paper, we introduced an interpretative framework to understand the communicative role of data visualization within data stories. We tested it by analyzing data stories on water-related issues. We now propose some design considerations. First, we argue that data visualization would benefit from a more consistent design, both in terms of visual and content. Instead of being relegated to a neutral and contextual role, they should be more in tune with the overall tone of the narrative. In our corpus, data visualization is rarely used to represent potential solutions. Whereas water-related problems are often critical, we recommend investing more care in discussing possible solutions. This could support a shift, providing a more constructive approach in regards to the issues at hand. Lastly, we identified different types of layout. The overlap, designed to convey a holistic image of several textual and visual blocks, and the alternate flow, effective in delivering content orderly to the reader. Whereas effective, both structures revolve around text as the core element for the story, taking little advantage of visualization's flexibility and potential for interactivity. We suggest better interweaving of visual artifacts and the use of data visualization as a foundational blocks when planning data stories. That is to say, design them to convey a holistic image of several textual and visual blocks.